The American Civil War was a vital moment in modern history. If the South had won, the United States might still be disunited today, and we might not be living in a time of Pax Americana. Many think the South had no realistic chance of winning, thanks to the industrial superiority of the North. But the Confederates had a number of advantages of their own. Among them was control of the Mississippi River, North America's natural highway system. The strategic importance of the Mississippi River Basin cannot be overstated, and as long as the South controlled it, they had a chance of victory. So naturally, the North put huge effort into taking control of it. By midsummer 1863 they had achieved this. From then, Southern defeat was inevitable, and the Confederates needed to accept that their way of life was doomed. But not all were willing to accept this. As their world collapsed around them, many Southerners chose instead to move away and establish colonies in new lands. These Confederate colonies were built on Confederate values and sprung up all over the place. Many went to Belize, as she is the only English-speaking country in Central America, but many more went to Mexico, which at the time was ruled by Emperor Maximilian. An Austrian by birth, he wanted to Europeanize Mexico. To put it bluntly, he wanted more white people. So he granted huge swaths of lands to Confederate settlers. There was even a proposal for the Confederacy to invade Mexico and form a new superstate. That proposal ultimately came to nothing, as did most Confederate colonies, but a handful of colonies survived, and you might be surprised to hear they were in Brazil. Probably not if you read the title of this video, but let's face it, not all of you can read. Brazil in those days was also an empire, ruled by Emperor Pedro II. He was desperate to modernize Brazil's economy, so he welcomed Confederate settlers, hoping they could build a cotton industry to rival America's. With massive amounts of warm, fertile land and a welcoming emperor, more and more Confederates fled to Brazil. On top of that, slavery was still legal in Brazil. It was a Confederate's wet dream, and by 1885 20,000 had made the move. Before long, they numbered enough to establish a colony in the state of Sao Paulo. By the name of New Texas, the colony was ill-fated from day one. On their way to Brazil, its founders were shipwrecked, finding themselves stranded on Cuba. When the group eventually arrived, an outbreak of tuberculosis crippled them, ending the colony after just a few years. But New Texas was not the only Confederate colony in Brazil. Some were founded deep in the Amazon rainforest. Perhaps in remote areas of the Amazon, such colonies still exist. The most successful colony, however, was also in Sao Paulo. It's called Americana, and is most likely the only Confederate colony to not end in failure. Here they continued life as normal. They spoke English, ate Southern food, and generally only married within the community. Americana was a true cultural bubble, a southern town in the middle of Brazil. Some families continued to own slaves, until slavery was abolished in 1888. One Confederado was so desperate to keep his slaves that he led a lynch mob to murder a local police chief. So that was a horrifying series of words. Inevitably, over time, the culture and bloodlines of Americana became diluted, as younger generations learned Portuguese and married Brazilian natives. Yet still Americana thrived, with the factories and sugar farms established by its original settlers. Americana today is home to over 200,000 people. It is a modern Brazilian city, and locals are known as Americanese, not Confederados. But look closely and you'll see elements of Confederate culture even now. It's common to see the Confederate flag flown, even by mixed-race descendants of the original settlers. Until recently, the flag was even depicted on the city's coat of arms. In 1972, then Governor of Georgia, Jimmy Carter, paid visit to Americana. He and his wife were shocked by how alike Southern Americans the locals were. They even spoke English with Southern accents, despite being fifth-generation Brazilians. That was almost 5 decades ago, and with their Southern accent gradually fading, it might soon be entirely gone. The more visible elements of Confederate culture will inevitably fade also, but the entire existence of Americana will always be part of the American Civil War's legacy, and to some extent, a monument to the Confederacy. It's thought there could be over 100,000 descendants of Confederate settlers in Brazil today. Interestingly, Americana was founded by William H. Norris. Norris was a state senator in Alabama and Grand Master of the Masonic Lodge in Alabama. Because of this, conspiracy theories have long surrounded Americana. There are some who believe a secret underground network of modern Confederates is administered from Americana. According to rumor, they aim to forge a new Confederate superstate comprising Mexico and the entire Caribbean. Here they would go back to their old way of life, keeping slaves and establishing sugar plantations. As I said, this is just a conspiracy theory, but there is some historical basis for the claim. In the mid-1800s, there was a secret society known as the Knights of the Golden Circle. Their goal was to unify the Confederacy with Mexico, and then invade Cuba. These collective lands would be ruled by Emperor Maximilian, who was dedicated to maintaining slavery. The Knights of the Golden Circle boasted massive numbers, but they knew that wouldn't be enough to save the Confederacy, given that Union states outnumbered them. During the Civil War, they met in secret to plot revolution and the kidnapping of Abraham Lincoln. Not by coincidence, the man who ultimately assassinated Lincoln was a member. Another of their members was Confederate President Jefferson Davis. In a sense, the organization was a Confederate Secret Service, referred to simply as the KGC. According to official documents, the KGC was shut down in 1863, but some historians believe they simply went further underground. Perhaps those historians are right, and the KGC attempted to launch a second American Civil War. Perhaps the KGC still exists, and is based in Americana.